active learning generally is it's an experiential. I can't say the word. It's after lunch. Experiential learning approach. It's a student-focused approach. It's a learning by doing model, and we can contrast that with the transmission mode of actually telling people. And I said considerable evidence to support. And the critical words there are well-designed active learning. Active learning, inquiry-based learning, whatever the terms are, isn't an answer in itself. It may be a partial answer if it's well-designed. It has to be well-designed. There are many examples of active learning which are awful. No learning taking place. Lots of busyness, but actually nobody's learning anything. So it can be a disaster. Resource-based learning, 20 years ago that became all the fad. We'll do a lot of resources and that. And some staff took it as what they call the BOFO strategy. I won't say the word, but often find out for yourself, or the FOFO strategy if you want to use the language. And it was a way of, you can go and just go and find for yourself, and I can go and get on with my research and do other things. Not that much learning was taking place. They had to design activities to actually engage the students, in that learning. So this comes, I love this quote from Graham Gibbs, where he says, it's not enough just to do, nor is it enough just to think, nor is it enough simply to do and think. Learning from experience must involve linking the doing and the thinking. And that's really the critical thing. How do we link, how do we design activities which link the doing and the thinking? Because unless you have some reflection on those activities and get that linkage, you're not going to get much learning. They'll have great fun and say they come out with smiling faces, didn't we do great? But they may not have learnt until they've linked that reflection, to the actual what are the lessons there. So does that match your conception of what inquiry-based learning is about?
That taking responsibility for learning is from the student, right? Somehow it's not in the cycle, right?
Right. It's almost, if you're going to do inquiry-based learning, which is a form of sort of, I suppose, independent learning, a necessary, it's almost a motivational question, and here they will take some responsibility for doing it. So that, in a sense, is a precursor, if you like, to get them involved. And you might say the motivation, they might do it simply because they're told to do it, but they're not very motivated, so they might not put much effort into it.
What was Justice's field of study?
He's a psychologist by training.
So this, I come from a science perspective, and we would inquire in a slightly different way than that. Mm-hmm. So I would certainly not build my inquiry model in that exact way.
Yeah. Yeah, you might have the scientific method of setting up a hypothesis and testing it, and that. Yes, you can obviously change the way, and certainly change the order in which you do things, and that that goes back to discipline variations on what knowledge means and construction of knowledge in those different disciplinary contexts. In the humanities, that would probably be too linear, and it would be much more discussion based and very very different. But that's a more social science approach, I suppose, to inquiry based learning. But if we're broadly agreed with those sort of headings, with some variation on the wording and the order in which we do it, that helps some commonality there. So, as I said, inquiry-based learning can really take place at a number of different levels, and we might use different language to describe it. So we might just call it active learning when it's an exercise in class. If it's the whole class, it might be a form of active learning. It might be inquiry. A whole semester course, it's rather more structure for the whole course. And sometimes the whole program developed. And those who take problem-based learning in some of the medical and health sciences, particularly in the early days when they did it, they sort of went over the whole way, and everything was problem-based learning. Most people have learnt now that there's not one way of doing it, and some of it's problem-based learning, and they bring in other methods of teaching as well. They realise the importance of variety as well as that. But some courses are predominantly one mode of learning rather than another.
No exam.
No exam. Yeah, that's pretty important for students. Yeah. Sorry.
Those adopt the group work.
Group work. Yes, there's group work involved in both. Other similarities.
Plus students to do reflection,
Both have reflection included, yes.
But there is peer assessment too, or peer review, and
Yes, but in particularly in one, but there's an element of it in both. Other similarities? Well, I've said it in some ways that they are both inquiry-based learning courses at the most basic thing, and that's a key similarity there. And then it's the nature of that inquiry, how they've applied that. There are some similarities in having quite a few similar exercises. But more than that, I think they're both structured, aren't they? They both have weekly activities, something happening each week. That's common to both of them. They may be slightly different activities, but there. There's some commonalities in assessment as well as or methods of assessment. Both involve some reflection. Both involve a group project. So there are quite a lot of similarities actually when you stand back from it. What about differences? Again, stand back from it a moment. Not the nitty-gritty first of all. What's perhaps the most important difference between the two courses?
I noticed that for EL 3 through 5, the group report shares 60%.
I'll come to that in a moment. That's a nitty-gritty thing about percentages and that. What?
I think the McMaster course is student-driven. In other words,
Yeah.
they decide what issue, what project to go forward with.
In many ways, that's a similarity because the groups choose their project for environmental issues as they do for the other. They both. That's a similarity rather than a difference.
But group one is driven by that by that topic. Rather, in the second one, the summary, the content delivered is showing competing interests of both sides, right?
No, I think
they're
it's
showing different environmental philosophies. Whereas
all right. They both have some lectures there, and that's what the lecture is on. I'll tell you the background in a moment. But they are both student-driven by. Both groups, they have to come up with a researchable project related either to the theme in the McMaster group or a local environmental issue in the Gloucestershire example. So they both have that in common.
Then the big difference would be number 2 is taught by many different people because they have a variety of different tutors teaching different aspects. So the learning experience would be different, whereas the first
I think probably in the McMaster case, each group has about 24 students to 30 students with an instructor present. There may only be one person in the McMaster case that the students meet, like the two of us in the other. So it's not a huge difference between that.
In terms of how they're described, the second course begins with the content, if you like, and then goes to what the objective of the course is. Whereas the first course takes it the other way around.
Okay.
What's the overall purpose of this thing, and then the actual content is kind of relegated.
One is much more process-oriented, the McMaster one, about the skills they're going to learn, the learning how to learn skills, while the other is interested in the outcome of the environmental issues that they're studying, so a product versus process orientation. But there's one difference you haven't actually mentioned yet, which is, I think, fundamental to all of them, and helps explain why one's a process-oriented and one's a product-oriented.
I have noticed that for the first one, McMaster thing, you have course objectives, but in the second one, it is portrayed as learning outcomes. So it's more student-oriented. That one is like the course after finishing the course.
I think it's a language subtlety. Again, with respect, it's a nitty-gritty thing that, and both could be in learning outcome language. You might not have used that, explicitly. What you're missing, you all know, but you haven't said it. One's a first-year course and one's a final-year course. That's pretty fundamental to the differences. What's appropriate for a first-year course and the first semester, and what's appropriate as a capstone course in the final. That helps explain some of the differences, I think, that we're picking up. That's what I wanted to start with there. I think you all knew it, but I wanted someone to say it. So what are the differences? Now we can come to some more of the nitty-gritty ones.
So the second one is 60% group report, but the first one you have different goals here. Say, for example, it has been broken down to I think the main chunk for this course is capstone assignment, just 35%. If you add in the critical incident report, so it's like 55. But you have several goals here. You have reflection number 1, reflection number 2. So for me, this particular course is it seems to me it gives more opportunities for students to attempt. But for the the latter one, you just have to ensure you score very well
Yep.
on the group report.
Okay.
Once you lose that one, then probably you have the course.
Yeah, kind of, what you're picking up, and it is a real difference, is the number of assessments. Far more assessments and mini assessments on the McMaster one, fewer assessments on the Gloucestershire one. In many ways, that's a cultural difference. In North America, and you have to tell me to an extent, I think, in Hong Kong, you tend to have more assessments. It's North America, if it moves, you assess it, sort of view. And you'll get marks for attendance, and you get 2 or 3% for doing this and 2 or 3% for that. In the UK, we tend to have, we often have rules that, any module can have a maximum of 2 assessments, or even 1 assessment sometimes, because they're trying to cut the assessment load down. So it's a cultural difference in the way they're taught. So you could teach, if you moved one course to the other country, you would find the assessments changed in terms of that, just the way that the systems work there. So yes, it is a difference. It might partly reflect first year versus final year, but I think it's more a UK versus North America issue there. Other differences?
The second one has the peer and self-assessment, which the first one doesn't. Which the first one only got the peer review. The second one also. You had a self-assessment.
Yeah. I apologize. I've repeated 1 or 2 things I said this morning, but experience says that people are interested in that exercise about one of the problems of group work is how you get individual marks out of a group work assessment. I said this morning that we actually read all the literature that was available, and this was 20 years ago, more ago, that we actually started this in one university. I transferred it to another institution. And we came up with this idea of doing self and peer assessment on the principle that only the group could know what was happening within their group. We couldn't observe that, those functions. So we didn't know who was putting in most quality of effort into coming up with the research question, and collecting the data, analysing it, doing the presentations. These are all things which were private to the group. So I thought it was very appropriate, if we were wanting to assess the quality of work, to use the group's knowledge about how the group operated to redistribute the marks. And by having this system, it actually, I think, was self-fulfilling to good work taking place, because once the student, we explained on day 1 how the system operated, and made it very clear that if you were a high-quality student, as long as your colleagues recognised the quality of your contribution, you could get your best mark of the year on this course. There was some scepticism until we run it once or twice and we had the statistics to show that was happening. There were people getting 85%, which is hardly unknown in UK, on a course there where 75 would often be the highest mark people would get. The importance of questions. And that comes back to a broader theme we were talking about earlier, that students, when they come in, often have stopped asking questions. And I think we need to encourage them to ask questions. And even though they're just questions about the topics and their understanding of it, that's at one level. In this case, it's about questions about coming up with researchable questions. If you leave that to the final year, no wonder they have difficulty. Lots of evidence, and let's just play some of it there, that you get enhanced academic achievement through inquiry-based learning, deeper understanding, and higher grades, and more students doing honours. And the references to support some of that, and that's any selective ones. That's the same question again. The idea is that the students are asked to do some work beforehand and come with some knowledge to the session. And then, rather than spending that session where you give the knowledge, you're giving a lecture, say. My favourite definition of lecture is how it goes from our notes to the students' notes, without actually going through the head of either of us. And to say, actually, that is gold dust time. We have that limited time in contact with each other. That's the time when the learning is going to take place. Let's use that for learning to occur. Let's have discussions. Let's do problem solving. Let's do a series of exercises. And that's where the learning is going to take place, occurring it. The bit that often gets missed out is the follow-up one. What people tend to say, oh, this is what you're going to do next week. To reinforce the learning, you really want some sort of exercise at the end, which will involve some reflection and going back and linking what they've read with the activity they've done, if you haven't actually built that into the class itself. So that's the most common one. There are variants on that and in the rest of the handout, but those of you who had experience of running flipped classrooms, how does it work for you?
It worked only if there are marks being counted, otherwise no student would do it.
Okay, most common problem, as we always say, is getting students to do that first stage. So let's share things which have worked for you about how you've got your students to do it. You give them marks for something. Any other techniques you've used?
I don't let them participate when the other groups are in class, when we're discussing it in class and do it.
Yep.
They have to go to the other side of the classroom, and they have to read those materials and do everything. So
That's
they're
great.
a waste
So
of time. They're not getting that engagement.
Yeah,
and that learning.
you're losing out from it because you're having to read the article.
So I just don't want them to sit there and participate or sit in a group where they're just
And do
looking
nothing. They think
and
get
do
away with it.
nothing because they're benefiting from that
I
conversation.
have known people, and it's quite a hard strategy, your ticket to entry is that you've done it. And they will actually say, no, you can't go off until you've done it. It's a hard strategy, and it won't work for all students, but some students say, oh, I have to do it. The assessment is probably the most common way of putting a few marks in. And I overheard you saying you don't necessarily do assessment of everything, but they will know that some weeks there's going to be an assessment. They don't know which weeks, and so that encourages them. It's a bit like I was telling somebody, I'm not sure it's this group or one I did yesterday, that if you're doing, say, lab-based practicals, one way of reducing your mark load is not to say you're going to mark every one, but I'm going to mark 3 of them, but I'm not going to tell you which 3 I'm going to mark. So you have to do them all, and I will only mark 3 of them. That's what your grade's going to be based on. It's a way of reducing our workload, giving incentives for them to do. Any other strategies for getting them to do the work beforehand? I mean, the best strategy in some ways is hitting that motivational card to motivate them to want to learn, and they'll do it anyway. But we accept that some people won't. But sometimes we worry perhaps too much about those and not enough about the people who want to learn. But, powers that be will come down to us with a ton of bricks if we're failing quite a few people on our course. And so incentives are built in to find ways around that. The version, I think, which isn't so well known is this version of inquiry-based learning of flipped classroom, where it's at the whole program or course level. I found this particularly interesting because it links with what we were talking this morning about inquiry-based learning. Okay, the next one I think was those of you who looked at the planner. This comes from Phil Levy's work, we've mentioned a couple of times. Any comments on the planner? Speak up.
Yeah, it's very practical. So when you are able to answer all questions, then you can really come out a actual plan, a solution for your inquiry-based learning program.
Yeah.
So it's a toolkit. I like the toolkit.
Yeah. Any other comments on those who looked at the inquiry planner? What's your reaction to it? Most people see it like it. I know some people who have applied it. It comes out from 5 years of running inquiry-based learning programs. I think it's one, in a sense, to start with. As you're thinking of doing inquiry, look at, go away and do it, and then come back and use it as a checklist. See, have you done it? And say, oh, I've missed that 3 or 4 questions there. I need to go back and revise it. So it gives you a bit of confidence you've covered most of the bases. So look at it first as you're brainstorming your ideas, maybe brainstorming against each of those questions. Design your course and then come back and use it as a checklist. Yeah. What about the third one, which is the rubric about assessing inquiry-based learning? It's another form of way of learning. Who looked at that, and what was your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was very useful. So I actually did like a trial on the flipped classroom last term, and I did have like troubles trying to sort of formulating this into different categories. So I think this would be very, very useful for me to go back and perhaps revise on my current strategies.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a slide we used this morning, but I wanted to repeat it. This of the difference between structured, guided, and open inquiry-based learning activities, the degree to which they're scaffolded, common distinction that's made between them. I want to replay that because I gave you some evidence this morning, but I said I'd look at some different evidence. This still comes from Rachel's New Zealand program, where she got students taking these different inquiry-based learning courses around New Zealand to report back the extent to which they were getting a great deal of these types of learning, which are from Bloom's taxonomy, from memorizing, understanding, analyzing, applying, evaluating, creating, and reflecting. The idea that towards the right end is seen as high levels of learning. And what you see, she's structured in two ways. It's either on this slide, it's the distinction between the type of course, whether it's structured, guided, or open. Forget the mixed category. And you'll see that only for memorizing, which is the lowest level in Bloom's taxonomy, does structured activities report a higher proportion of that activity taking place. In every other one, and it tends to go up in a step, but not always, actually always it does, the open-ended activities reported higher than the guided activities, and often a lot higher than the memorizing activities in terms of the responses giving a great deal of that activity taking place. So some evidence there, no, not huge differences, but enough inconsistency there said that if you want the higher levels of learning, if you have a choice, choose the more open-ended rather than the highly structured one. And again, not to say always do that, but there is at least some evidence to say that's more effective. And similarly, the distinction we made this morning between information-oriented activities and discovery-oriented, information-oriented where it's new knowledge for them, but not for us. Discovery-oriented when it's open-ended and we don't know what they're going to find, and it's new knowledge. In this case, in every single case, even memorizing, the students were reporting higher levels of learning if you get into the discovery end of the spectrum rather than the information-oriented. So again, if you have a choice, go for the more higher level learning, higher level activities, and go for questions where we don't know what the answers are going to be and we're learning together. So that's some of the evidence to back up some of the points we were making. Last exercise I'm going to do with you, well, last but one, it's going to be a short exercise at the end. I'd like each table to come up with a question. It's not a researchable question, but an outstanding question that you haven't yet felt has been answered satisfactorily. You've still got a nagging doubt about something and that. The challenge is you may all have 4 questions that you want to ask with that, but you've got to agree just one question, and I want you to keep it simple and short. So I don't want 3 or 4 questions merged into one, with lots of paraphrased ones. Just one question, no more than about 12 words. You have a post-it there, so it's a small post-it. You're not going to get many words on there. There is actually a considerable amount of evidence of the effectiveness of what we've been talking about today out there, so it's good. But active inquiry learning is, I suppose, my take-home message I want to play to you. I think it has a role to play in our repertoire. I've perhaps say in a slightly different way, it's one way of responding to some of the issues that we face in higher education, but it's only one way, and there are plenty of other things, or variety. And the critical thing I keep emphasising, if you want to impact student learning, it's the quality of designing that activity. And a lot of thinking has got to go into that design to get it. And you try it out, you trial it, you change it, you reflect on it, you change it the next year. You know, we all learn. We've got to be innovative learners. And that has implications for the institution of allowing us to take risks. And sometimes institutions are often risk adverse. But if you want to move things on, and actually we have to be allowed to take risks. But equally, we need to involve our students and not disadvantage them because we're taking risks, and explain to them why we're doing it and make sure that they don't suffer as a result if that doesn't work for us. And that's a challenge in itself.